Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay? Good? Okay, terrific. Well, I would just say that it is really an honor to be with all of you today, and Diane could not be more correct that I literally have to be in about six different places at this very moment. Nowhere is more important than to be with all of you in your beautiful community, and I mean that with all sincerity. And what my hope was that to be there in person with all of you. And then we had the Department of the Interior come out with basically a mandate that any travel for any federal employee within the Park Service, it had to be, quote, mission critical. So that's when we kind of devised this setup. So although it's not quite the same, being there with each and every one of you, it's certainly better than nothing, if you would. So I really look to take the next hour or so, whatever, however long it takes, and we're comfortable with one another and sharing your sentiments or thoughts or any questions that you may have. My objective is to really try to bring the memorial to each and every one of you, even through words, and to kind of take you back almost 20 years ago on Saturday to that morning, that Tuesday morning, and talk a little bit about the timeline of the airplane, what was happening, what these individuals aboard this flight were faced with, and why over 400,000 people come to this national memorial, a place that if you've been here, you'll know, and you have to really want to come here because it's off the beaten track. And I have no doubt that with the advent of the 20th anniversary, and the more stories are told about the 40, which I'll get into, that we will exceed 500,000 visitors, I would say within the next year or so. I would like to start off by saying that the memorial is free, and it is open 365 days a year. And the only 3 days that we close our visitor center, so rangers and others can enjoy the holidays with their families, is Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. Other than that, our visitor center is open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and it is a visitor center that you will not forget. It's incredibly simple, straightforward, incredibly powerful, very emotional. It's full of audio-visual reminders and so many tributes to our military, to our first responders, and certainly to the 40 heroes. So I would Diane mentioned that we will have quite the lineup on Saturday, and I will literally step to the podium at 9:45 sharp. And behind me on the stage will be former First Lady Laura Bush, former 43rd President of the United States George W. Bush. We'll have the president of the families of Flight 93, Gordon Felt, whose brother was on Flight 93. We will have Vice President Kamala Harris, the second gentleman as well as Governor Wolf, and finally the captain of the USS Somerset, which is based out of San Diego, who incidentally brought 40 of his sailors to the memorial. They flew yesterday and they're on site today. So it's going to be a very, very beautiful, very heavy Navy centric event on Saturday. So you may have seen in the news that, quote, the event is closed to the, quote, public. And I use the word quote because Although it is a closed event, so to speak, with family members, I think we're up to about 455 family members. And in my 6 years as the superintendent, we've averaged about 75, maybe 100 family members. So we have significantly increased the numbers of family members who will be in attendance. And then some invited guests, elected officials, of course, elected by all of us, and then some individuals, the architects, and some board members of various very, very key partners and organizations. But one thing I really want to share with you all, and again, with your loved ones and friends and family, it will be streamed. So when people use that word, I'm 56 years old, and I don't know how old you folks are, but when I hear the word streamed, that scares me. What is that? Yeah. And then you use the word Facebook. Yeah, I don't do Facebook. But thankfully, to really smart people, the event will be streamed worldwide on the National Park Service, our Flight 93 Facebook page. And you don't need Facebook. We want to make it as easy as possible for those that aren't as comfortable using the internet as others, because I'm not. So at about 9:35 this Saturday morning, if you're at your computer, you can go online and we'll send out the link over and over to the various media outlets all over the world. And you just click on one button. You don't have to install anything. And you will be able to witness the 20th anniversary here at Flight 93. It's going to be, as I mentioned, a really, really powerful and beautiful ceremony. So if I can kind of walk you through that particular event. Again, at 9:45, I'll welcome everyone. We'll have an invocation from the chaplain. She's a retired admiral with the United States Navy, but she currently serves as the chaplain for the United States House of Representatives. Again, symbolizing where Flight 93 was going, to the U.S. Capitol building. So Admiral Kibben will provide the invocation, and then, of course, we'll have the national anthem. I see your flag, by the way, in the back, which always does my heart good. And then we'll go right into the reading of the names, the 40 heroes, and followed by the name reading, we'll have the bells of remembrance. And it takes about 15 minutes, but again, a very somber, very powerful part of the hour-and-a-half event. Our music will be conducted by none other than the U.S. Marine Band, known as the President's Own. They very rarely leave D.C., and they only play for the President of the United States and the Commandant of the Marine Corps. And when I reached out to that organization back in February, they said, well, there's going to be a lot of things going on. We don't know where the president is going to be. And ultimately, they contacted us, and they are honored to play the music. It's the oldest organized band in the country, back to the 1700s. So to have the U.S. Marine Band is really a privilege. It really is an honor. So, through the speakers and some other special guests, we will commence at about 11 or so, maybe 11:10, with a wreath laying ceremony. And then later that day, President Biden will actually be here as well, but that will be after the ceremony. He and the First Lady will be coming in also, meeting with family members and laying a wreath. So there's no doubt preparing for all of those high-level, officials, if you would, takes a lot of time, takes tremendous teamwork. Just the Secret Service itself, you're probably looking at 200 or 300 people. Just that. Not to mention the governor's protective detail and the troopers and the 20 horses and dogs and snipers, and oh my gosh, it's going to be a busy day. But I look for it to be a special day and a beautiful day. And probably as important as the streaming is the notification to everyone that the gates will be open just as soon as we get the clearance from officials that it's safe to do so. Last year, President Trump was here, and I had stated to the media that we were going to open the gates at noon. And when President Trump concluded, and he was, as they say, wheels up, it was 11:30. And I shared with our team, and I said, folks, let's get those gates open. And those gates were open at 11:35. So again, it hurts me. Again, as Diane said, I do manage 5 national parks. And it hurts me to literally close a restroom, let alone a national memorial on such an important day. But we believe it's the right thing to do from a public health perspective, because if you've been to the Wall of Names, it's a site that is very refined. It's very constricted, with wetlands on one side and the Wall of Names and some other areas. So we can't have 5 to 10,000 people like this. It's just not safe. We're still in a worldwide pandemic, but we will still have about 600 people in attendance. They will be seated 6 feet apart, and we believe that we're going to have a beautiful, safe event. So once again, yes, it will be, quote, closed, but it'll be streamed worldwide. And the gates will open just as soon as we get the clearance. And when you think about the 33 passengers on that aircraft, several of those individuals were from other countries. Toshia Kuge, for instance, was a young man, 20 years old, who was visiting the United States, loved American football, loved the Pittsburgh Steelers, and yes, I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan, being from Philadelphia, but he loved the Steelers, and his mom, Mrs. Kuge, as she's very, very affectionately known, she has been to every observance until last year with COVID. And we did stream it live worldwide last year. And unfortunately, we received an email from Mrs. Kuge once again that she's not permitted to travel from Japan because of COVID. So that's why it's so important to make sure that family members like Mrs. Kuge and others can really embrace and feel a part of that beautiful ceremony this coming Saturday. We have had over 110, and they continue to grow, media outlets, unlike anything I've ever seen. I mean, as far away as Norway and Switzerland and Russia and China, and all of these media outlets from all over the world are going to be here, going to be covering this event. So no question, it really will have an awful lot of attention, if you would, brought to the memorial, and most importantly, to these 40 people. Why do we memorialize these 40 people? Ladies and gentlemen, as I look at the crowd, obviously some of you have been around a little while, and in our lifetimes, planes crash, tragically. They do. But they're part of the news cycle, and it's gone. And then something else will happen, tragically. It'll be part of the news cycle, and then gone. September 11th, 2001, Tuesday morning, on the entire East Coast. Beautiful, beautiful, high pressure, blue skies, puffy white clouds, gorgeous, gorgeous day. Little did we know, and I was a ranger, as Diane said, in the U.S. Virgin Islands, on the island of St. John in 2001, and it was a normal day. People on the 4 airplanes, 2 out of Boston, 1 out of Dulles, and Flight 93 out of Newark, bound to San Francisco. The first jetliner crashed into the first World Trade Center building at 8:46. Try to think with this timeline how incredible and how tight this window is. 8:46, plane number 1. Hey, what was that? That a heart attack? Was that a little Cessna aircraft? They just lost their way flying in the Hudson? Interesting. Got some media attention. 9:03. 9:03. Some of you may have witnessed that live when they had their cameras on Tower 1 and they were looking up with the smoke billowing, and then all of a sudden the journalist, everybody in shock, said, "Oh my God, another plane has just hit the second tower." 9:03. 8:46, 9:03, 2 planes into the tower. This was no accident. It was a terrorist attack. What was Flight 93 doing? Flight 93 was continuing on its journey west, about to enter the Cleveland airspace, until 9:28, when the 4 terrorists, never mention their names, they don't deserve other than the terrorists, because that's what they are, murderers. These 4 individuals, all seated in first class, got up, they donned bandanas, and they took control of the airplane at 9:28, and they breached the cockpit. They were able to penetrate the cockpit, take control of the airplane, extract the 2 pilots, one Leroy Homer, the co-pilot, seated in the right, and Jason Dahl, the pilot, seated in the left. Later, witnesses on the airplane claimed that both pilots were face down, not moving, bleeding. And one can surmise what occurred. They were able to take control of that airplane, 2 of them, inside the cockpit. And the terrorist pilot got on the microphone and said, "They've met our demands. We're going back to the airport. Go to the back of the plane." And that's what they did. When they got to the back of the plane, they realized that the muscle, as Al-Qaeda called them, they were there up in first class, keeping them at bay, to stay in the back, protecting the cockpit, so these terrorists could complete their mission, which we believe it was the United States Capitol building, as I alluded to earlier. That was at 9:28. 13 passengers and crew members made a total of 37 phone calls. During that period of 9:28, 9:30 to 9:37, this is when American Airlines Flight 77 struck the Pentagon. 37. Recap: 8:46, plane 1. 9:03, plane 2. 9:28, 93 is taken over. And at 9:37, plane 3 into the Pentagon. But here's the difference. When those heroes were in the back of the plane talking to loved ones on the airphone, remember the airphones, you'd slide your credit card? When they were talking to their loved ones and they were talking to 911 operators, talking about what's going on, our airplane has been hijacked, and then loved ones are saying, 2 planes went into the World Trade Center. And then at 9:37, when they learned in real time that American Airlines Flight 77 struck the Pentagon, they said to themselves, "We're not going back to any airport. We have to do something." And this is where it starts to take the road, if you would, to declare those people heroes. Because what they did, knowing that most likely they weren't going to go home to their families that night, They took a vote. They actually took a vote. Complete strangers. They took a vote and they decided to do something. And they devised a plan. Flight attendants boiling water to place into stainless steel pitchers because they knew they were going to go up through that center aisle of that 757 and try to get this plane back. And they knew they needed weapons against these muscle to be able to go through them and try to get to the cockpit. So they used seat cushions as shields. They used boiling hot water. They used soda cans. But ladies and gentlemen, many of these people on that plane of the 40, they were judo champions. They were all-star quarterbacks. These were incredibly athletic, a lot of them. And most importantly, they were filled with anger that the courage just came from within. And the famous story of Todd Beamer, who I just did a program with his father, David Beamer, and he and I were texting actually this morning at about 6 a.m. on some different things. Todd Beamer was talking to Lisa Jefferson. Lisa Jefferson was an airphone operator supervisor in Chicago. And Lisa and Todd are talking, and Todd says, Lisa, please tell my wife that I love her, and would you say the Lord's Prayer with me? And she did. They did. And at the conclusion of that conversation, that prayer, Todd says, I have to go. We're getting ready to do something. Todd, don't hang up, Lisa says. And he doesn't. He lays the phone down on the seat. And that's when she literally heard him, clear as day, as she claims, is everybody ready? Okay, let's roll. And that was at 9:57. The next 6 minutes, United Airlines Flight 93 impacted the Earth at 10:03 and 11 seconds to be exact. But those 6 minutes between 9:57 and 10:03 were, in essence, the first counterattack from terrorism by complete civilians. They made it up through that center aisle. They were able to subdue the muscle. And they made it to the cockpit door. How do we know that? We know that because of the cockpit voice recorder. On those cockpit voice recorders in Arabic, you can hear the terrorists speaking to one another. Should we put it down? No. Let's wait till they all come. But in English, it can pick up. These recorders were picking up into the cockpit or we die. And these cockpit voice recorders were picking up glass breaking, dishes shattering, etc. But this pilot knew they were coming and that these people were hell-bent to thwart their goal, which was to fly that airliner into the U.S. Capitol building. So what does he do? Steers the plane left to right in a series of porpoising maneuvers, put them off balance. And at the very end, about 10:02 and 30 seconds or so, he turns it to the right and the aircraft inverts. It turns over, flips over. So at that point, of course, an airliner can't fly. It loses its lift. And again, at 10:03 and 11 seconds, traveling at 563 miles an hour at about a 40-degree angle, it hits the Earth. Of course, killing everyone instantly. 18 minutes flying time from Washington, D.C. 18 minutes. And what was going on in Washington, D.C.? You had both the Senate and the House in session. You had over 4,500 employees Not to mention the countless visitors who were in and around that Capitol building. So when you think about what these 40 people did, there's no question that they saved countless lives. How many, we'll never know. But I can guarantee you one thing, people are on this earth today because of their sacrifice. And I believe that they really felt that they were going to go home that day. One of the passengers, Donald Green, was a pilot. We don't know if Mr. Green was part of that. I like to think he was, to say, hey, I fly Cessnas, but I'll do my best. Let's try to get this plane back. Filled with rage and courage. They just ran out of time. So very early on, the families and the federal government, the National Park Service, working with community members, organizations, leaders, knew that of the 3 attack sites at the Pentagon in New York and here in Flight 93, that this was going to become part of the national park system. It was going to become a national memorial. And working together, once again, with partners, especially our communities, amazing things started to happen. Working with the landowners, the families purchased the tracts of land that now make up the 2,200 acres. Great place. And in 2011, for the 10-year anniversary, we dedicated the Wall of Names and the boulder, the crash site. And that 17-ton sandstone boulder actually marks the impact site in the Field of Honor, the sacred ground. And in 2015, we dedicated, as I mentioned earlier, the Visitor Center and the Learning Center. And then in 2018, the Tower of Voices, which happens to be near and dear to my heart. I live about 5 minutes from here, and I would say, well, certainly at least 2 times a day, but sometimes more often, I just stroll through the parking lot of the Tower of Voices. And I'm sure Diane and others are keeping maybe a track here and there of some notes, but what I would encourage you all to do is, if you haven't been here, you can go to a website, basically, earthcam.com, EARTHCAM.com, earthcam.com. And when you get to earthcam.com, type in the search bar, Tower of Voices, and click on the live button. And you can see and hear the Tower of Voices in real time. You can listen and view at 3 in the morning when there's a full moon and there's a beautiful wind. And if I could describe to you before, if you've never seen an image of the Tower of Voices, it's a 93-foot high tower, solid concrete, with 8 columns, with cross beams. And contained in this tower are 40 wind chimes. And when you think of wind chimes, maybe on your porch or something like that, ladies and gentlemen, these wind chimes are 200 to 300 pounds a piece. They're 10 feet long. Each one tuned individually. And when we have that beautiful Western Pennsylvania Somerset breeze, those chimes sing in a way that will take your breath away. Absolutely incredible. Again, symbolizing the voices of the 40. And when you come in off of Route 30, on the right will be our beautiful entrance sign. And directly behind the entrance sign, for you gardeners out there, we have 4 colonies of honeybees, and we planted a very large pollinator garden. We're talking like 200 yards long. It's big. And I like to refer to those colonies of bees that do so well even through these harsh winters, are sentries. They protect this place. And so when you come in, you have, you have the sign, And then on the left, you have the Tower of Voices. You embrace that. You drive about 2 miles, and then you embrace our visitor center. Be able to walk on the flight path, exact flight path, and look down at the wall of names and at the crash site. And then finally, the plaza, where you can walk relatively close, maybe 75 yards, 100 yards within the boulder, and then to the wall of names. And again, each location within these 2,200 acres are very unique, very special in their own right, and extremely inspirational. So that is where we are here at Flight 93. And if you haven't been here, excuse me, it's worth the journey. It really is. Make a day of it. Come to Somerset. Embrace these small communities. Have lunch. Do what you do. But I would say allow at least 3 hours. We have wheelchairs available at these various sites for those that may need some assistance. We have our ambassadors. Our ambassadors, quote, are volunteers, but we like to refer to them, actually, they referred to themselves on September 11, 2001 as ambassadors. Community members who took it upon themselves to come to the memorial and explain to people what happened, facts, because people were making things up. And these community members from Shanksville and Friedens and Stoystown and elsewhere in this area brought state troopers cookies and water and lasagna and meatballs, sandwiches. Then you had the Red Cross and you had the Salvation Army, thousands of first responders descended. There were no people to rescue. It was a body recovery. And thanks to the people in the Somerset County Coroner's Office, namely Wally Miller and others, they were able to identify all 40 passengers and crew members, either through DNA, fingerprint, or dental record. One of those three. And having spoken with Wally Miller many times, oftentimes the only thing left when a violent crash like that happens to a human body is DNA. And it's something to behold for all 40 of those families to have something that they took from the coroner to go back to their respective hometown to be able to bury their loved one. And Wally and others were able to give that to those 40 families. And that's very powerful. Diane said that I got here in 2015. True. But I got here in March of 15, but a few months prior to that, my boss in Philadelphia said, Steve, I need you to do 3 things when you get out there. I'm a 35-year veteran. I follow orders. I'm in law enforcement. Yes, sir. What would those be? 1, 2. Number 3 was, we need you to bury the wreckage of Flight 93. Didn't really know what that meant. No clue. It took us 3 years to work together as a team with the United States military, families, the FBI, Park Service, the National Park Foundation, United Airlines. And ultimately, in March of 2018, we descended upon the warehouse located in Connecticut, where the FBI had sent 5 40-foot shipping containers back in October of 01. So these 5 40-foot shipping containers had been in this warehouse since October of 01. And here we are, all those years later, in March of 18, sifting through that wreckage. Now, some of my staff said, Steve, let's just take those 5 40-foot shipping containers, put them on trucks, dig the hole and lower them in and call it good. Let them rest. Let them be. Because not only were there over 90% of the airplane in those 5 containers, but so were DNA, the spirit parts of the 40, no question. I was not going to make that decision. I went to Gordon Felt, president of the families. I said, Gordy, I said, I'm going to let you all make this decision. So he went to their executive board and he calls me back a few days later and he said, Steve, we'd like to sift through the wreckage one more time before we bury it. And that's what we did again in March of 18. And then again in April, the first week of April of 2018. In essence, on our hands and knees, we recovered and sifted through that entire plane. We kept almost 600 objects that the Park Service were in the forever business. We recovered both engines. We recovered a wheel from the cart that they used as a battering ram as they went up through that center aisle. We found human remains. We found objects that were personal. We found a driver's license. Folks, you know, in your lives, you have these memories when you're witnessing something. I was walking by, her name is Bryn Bender. She was our curator at the time, and she was on her hands and knees with her Tyvek suit and her mask and her respirator. And I just happened to be walking by, and she stopped. And she took off her glove, and she picked this object up. And it was Captain Jason Dawes' Visa card. Extraordinary. So we found 8 objects, personal effects, that we kept, of course. We went to each of those families with the help of Gordy and the FBI and law enforcement assets, rangers and agents, to those 8 families, and we said, we found your daughter's driver's license. All these years later, would you like to have it? Of those 8 families, 7 families said, thank you so much. We'd like the Park Service to keep it in their collection for our loved one. All but 1 family, it was a Sears credit card from I'll just say from a passenger, and the family elected to keep that. And we thought that was great. So what I'm sharing with you folks, very few people know, because I've had the honor and the privilege to be a part of these moments that will live with me forever. And I've seen a lot of things, folks. Being a law enforcement officer in the Park Service, you see a lot of bad things. You see a lot of sad things. A lot of fatalities. I'll leave it at that. You wouldn't think so as a Park Service ranger, but we see it all. Trust me. And oftentimes it's very emotional and it wears on you. But these experiences here at Flight 93 have been really powerful, and I've been blessed to have a great mom and dad, both of whom are now deceased, but with their 6 kids, they talked about integrity and pride and passion, and that's what I bring with me every day. I bring my mom and dad and their spirit of doing the right thing and taking care of these families, taking care of the American people, to tell the story of United Airlines Flight 93. So with that, like I said, I know I've been doing a lot of talking, but it's from the heart, and I would be happy to take any questions that you all may have, and just kind of turn the conversation back to many of you, and if you'd like, and again, I'll stay on as long as you'd like. Diane?
Does anyone have questions? Annie? excuse me, you said that they told you 3 things to do, and you only started with the third. What were second and first?
Pass on that. It was more internal HR personnel type things that I needed to address. Yes, it wouldn't be appropriate in this venue to talk about 1 and 2, I promise, or I would. But thankfully, I was able to get all 3. And but thank you for that. It's such a great question. That's a question my father, who just passed away, as I mentioned, actually in February, was my very best friend, 82 years old. He was a newspaper reporter for the Philadelphia Daily News for almost 50 years. And ma'am, I'm telling you right now, that's a question that he would have asked. 1 and 2. What do you mean you can't divulge that? What are you hiding? I'm not hiding anything other than something that wouldn't be appropriate in this venue. But that's such a great question, and thank you for asking it. Anything else?
Yeah. Hi, Mr. Clark. I was at the memorial this Monday. And I also was across, and I got to hear the Tower of Voices.
Nice.
Across Route 30, they're starting a Patriot Park.
Yes.
That was very moving when you see more than 7,000 flags representing people who have sacrificed for the global war on terrorism. Will the National Park Service have any role in assisting with the development of the Patriot Park or supporting them?
Wow. Thank you. Again, I don't like people that say, that's a great question. That's a really great question. You ever hear that? But that's a really great question. But I have such a great answer, if I may say so. A couple of years ago, his name is Randy Musser. Randy is an engineer, I think almost 40 years engineer. He owns his own company just a couple of miles from here. In fact, his land, his farm abuts and is adjacent to the memorial. He came into my office one day. In fact, I'm looking at the poster that he sent to me, and he says, this is my vision. I want to honor those men and women who have died in the global war on terror, which is the term used since 9/11. Since 9/11, men and women joining the military and who have given their life. That's what Patriot Park is. So Randy comes to me and he says, Steve, I purchased this land a couple of years ago. I didn't really know what to do with it. And it literally falls within the legislative boundary of Flight 93. What does the legislative boundary mean? That means when Congress introduced and wrote the bill and so forth, and President George W. Bush signed it again in September 24th of 2002, it's not federal property, but in a perfect world, we would like to get that property. So a Burger King doesn't go up across the street or a Walmart or something like that. And so Randy said to me, Steve, I don't really know what this means, but this is what I'd like to do with my property. Wow. Randy, that's a curveball for me. Let me check with our solicitor. So I call our solicitor in Boston, and thankfully he said, yeah, obviously it's private property. He can do whatever he wants, which is what I really love to hear. So I went back to Randy. I said, Randy, sir, you can do whatever you wish. It's your land. And so ever since that day, he and I have been very close. I attended the dedication just last week. I was at the groundbreaking, provided remarks at the groundbreaking a couple of months ago. So although it's not federal land, although it's not, quote, federal property, and I can't send my maintenance staff to shovel sidewalks or do anything in a maintenance for my law enforcement rangers to patrol, there's no question that those who developed Patriot Park know that the National Park Service, as well as the families of Flight 93, are tremendous partners to that mission because it's a perfect nexus to what the 40 did. Our men and women in uniform are just continuing where they left off to protect this nation. So once again, folks, when I said 3 hours at Flight 93, try to carve out some time because it's literally a half a mile just west of the entrance of the park, not even a half a mile. Pull in there and be prepared to be inspired because sadly, we just lost another 13 men and women a couple of weeks ago in Afghanistan. But there are these flags, one for every single man and woman who gave their life for this nation, and it's incredibly moving. And they're still in the infancy of their project. I think they were saying they need about $6 million more to finish the vision. So again, we can't appropriate federal funds, but when you put the backing of this agency over 100 years old to the degree that I can as a federal official, I'm walking tall right next to Mr. Musser and his board to continue the vision of Patriot Park.
I'd like to ask, could you speak a little bit about the architecture of the memorial, how the architects were chosen, and what the buildings reflect? They're symbolic of?
Wow. Paul Murdoch from Los Angeles, he and his wife competed in a design competition back in the 04-05 era. The Park Service decided to open this design up to the world. 1,100 entries from over 27 countries submitted a design in hopes of being selected. There was a jury, Secretary of the Interior, Park Service Director, local community members, family members, and they whittled it down to 5. And then they selected another jury, and the Park Service gave those 5 $25,000 so they could kind of tell us more, build another model about what you're talking about. And ultimately, another jury was selected, and Mr. Paul Murdoch vision was selected. So Paul Murdoch, who, by the way, grew up 15 minutes from me in Philadelphia, you talk about a small world, brilliant mind, sight unseen. He designed this memorial in phases. Phase 1, as I mentioned, the Wall of Names, which are 40 individual marble panels, which each of the 40's names etched in these individual panels. And then the plaza, where we do our ranger programs, and the boulder, as I mentioned. And then, folks, it's so hard. And if I were there with you in person, and by the way, guys, invite me back next spring when all this, hopefully, COVID mess is over, and I can bring to you all these images. If you hadn't yet gotten here yet, you had a chance to travel. But when I talked about the Learning Center and the Visitor Center, it's not just a building. I talked about the flight path. It's brilliant what he does and how he folds in this visitor center, which you can't see from the road. It's obscured by these massive concrete walls. And as you walk on the flight path between these portals, Paul Murdoch forces your eyes on this sliver of sky. And then he takes you through another set of walls as you walk. And then he takes you to the overlook. But before you get to the overlook, etched in the glass there is our preamble to our mission statement, which is common field one day, a field of honor forever. So as you approach the end of the overlook, the end of the flight path, you read that, and then in the distance, you can see the boulder. So he wants you to walk through, and then once you come out, the entire landscape just hits you and inspires you as you get to the end of the walkway. So again, very difficult to describe and do it any justice, but again, it's incredible. And folks, like I said, I've been around a few years and I've been to some amazing places. You think of Yellowstone or Yosemite or Everglades, natural, God-given beauty. But this is something that another human being forces you to experience through his brilliance, and he does a masterful job. As a matter of fact, tomorrow afternoon, I will be facilitating a panel. You're all welcome at 3:00. I will be facilitating a panel. Let me see if I can remember all 6 panels. Architect Paul Murdoch, Henry Cook, who was the president of the Somerset Trust Bank, representing the amazing support from the business community, Gordy Felt, president of the Families, King Laughlin, vice president for the National Park Foundation, Donna Gibson, who is the president of the Friends of Flight 93, which again, I think it's like $20 a year. All of you can certainly join and be a part of their organization and newsletters and things like that. And a gentleman from the Park Service, he's kind of an icon for so many of us, John Reynolds. So John Reynolds was very instrumental in the very beginning with these task forces and these various Flight 93 commissions. So I will have the honor for 2 hours with these individuals trying to extract experiences and so forth, but I can't wait to be with Mr. Murdoch, again, the architect, and just hear it from him. It's going to be taped forever, so we're going to archive this for 100 years from now. You'll be able to hear from Paul Murdoch and John Reynolds and all this panel tomorrow. It's going to be a beautiful thing. And then after that, the families will be engaged with the U.S. Navy, and they're going to have like a little social that the Navy captain wants to provide for the families. And then tomorrow evening is what we have, what's called the Luminaria. And so the Luminaria is on Friday night, tomorrow night, starts at around 7, and it's where family members and some others will bring a lantern in a procession, in a single file procession, walking very slowly down to the wall of names, ultimately placing their respective lantern at each panel. And in the background, there will be musicians from the Johnstown Symphony Orchestra tomorrow night. And it's going to be incredible. And some of you may have seen in the past, especially in New York, on 9/11 with these 2 unbelievable towers of light to represent the World Trade Center. Last year, the Tunnel to Towers Foundation, after hearing that New York, because of COVID, wasn't going to do those towers of light, Tunnel to Towers said, no, we'll sponsor it. So not only did they sponsor it in New York, they reached out to the Pentagon and to us. And for the first time, all 3 attack sites had this tower of light. Folks, this goes up more than 30,000 feet into the atmosphere. You could see this tower, because it's so dark out here in Western PA, you could see it for 30, 40 miles. And what did that do for me? It spawned conversation with a 10-year-old. Mommy, what's that? I have no idea. What's that light? Where'd that come from? But ultimately, those parents, those teachers ultimately said, oh, that's to represent Flight 93 and the 40 heroes. Again, spawning that conversation for that next generation. And they will be back this year. In fact, I'm literally looking out my window, and that group is setting up these massive, massive spotlights, and there are 40 of them. And a little bit of a hint, keep this to yourselves because it's kind of a secret. When we reverse those lantern carriers, and now the symphony is over, and now everybody then picks up their lantern and walks back toward the plaza. As everybody is there, their eyes are going to be at the plaza, and it'll be a very silent 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and that light is going to go on, and nobody's going to know it. They're going to be like, "Oh my gosh!" So again, that choreography of just a powerful moment, which so many will experience in a spread out formation tomorrow evening. And one final thing, I know we were talking about Murdoch and his design, but this Johnstown Symphony Orchestra, which is an incredibly renowned group, they are actually playing a free concert at the stage. So where the stage is set up on Saturday afternoon at 3 p.m. So that's another beautiful addition to for folks to experience on September 11th. But Paul Murdoch is alive and well. His design will live forever. And again, I encourage all of you to come embrace it and experience it.
Are there any more questions? Superintendent Clark, on behalf of AAUW, I'd like to thank you for taking your time this morning for a most interesting and moving presentation. We wish you the best of luck this weekend. Thank you.
Wow. It's been a pleasure. That's great. Thank you all so much. And again, it's been an honor to be able to speak with you today, and safe travels. And gosh, if you do happen to get here, say, "Hey, is Steve around?" And here, I'll track you down, I can assure you. So once again, God bless America, and thank you all so very much for allowing me to bring Flight 93 to you. Take care.